I guess for you it's left to right. And so this is one of those beats that I find it to be useful to kind of work both ways. What's the most consistent thing that's happening in this groove? Which limb is kind of doing sort of the metronome's job?
Right
Anyone?
Hand.
Right hand and
Left foot.
left foot, and that kind of ties in with something the other two guys have already talked about, is giving the left foot some responsibility. I think that was the word you used. I like that word. So the whole groove, almost the whole song, and it's pretty incredible. Bonham's playing eighth notes with his left foot and his right hand, although he tends to decorate a little bit with his right hand, play some extra stuff, but that's the basic thing that's happening is this. Okay? And the rest of it is all a conversation between his right foot and his left hand. And in the case of this beat, I find it useful to get real comfortable with this first, and you'll notice at the bottom of the paragraph at the top I say, pick a tempo that allows for success, not survival. I find a lot of times students can be a little impatient. They want to play at a tempo close to the song or at the song's tempo. Chances are Bonham didn't figure out a lot of this stuff that fast. He probably figured out slow first. So you probably need to do the same thing. So I would say pick a tempo. I always underestimate, because the worst thing you can do is play too slow. You can always speed it up later, but you can't. It's much harder to unlearn mistakes. So pick a tempo maybe right about here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to play each of the measures on this page twice, and what you're going to see is you're going to basically hear the beat slowly come together. Here's what it sounds like. Each one of the next sections is a two-measure section, so now I'm going to be reading two measures at a time. That's the beat. Now, as you can see on the front page, after the little bio thing, he's doing a lot more stuff with his right hand. I have to say, many drummers might describe rock as being a simpler art form than jazz, and although if you go to your average rock show and your average jazz show, I think that might be a decent observation. I think you check out what he's doing with his right hand at the beginning of that song. That's every bit as complicated as some of the more difficult jazz transcriptions that I've worked on. So I think it says a lot about just the level of sophistication that Bonham and lots of rock drummers are capable of. So when I was deciding to do this clinic, I emailed a lot of my friends, and I emailed a lot of my friends who weren't drummers. I emailed a lot of my friends who were guitarists and bassists and asked them, what would you want drummers to know about John Bonham that you feel like a lot of drummers really don't get? And I got some really interesting emails back. One of the emails that really struck me was a friend of mine, Buddy Spear, who's a famous rock guitarist from the area. He actually just moved to Nashville, so we lost another one. But Buddy wrote me and he said, you know what really irritates me about, not irritates, I don't think that's the word he used, but what really frustrates me sometimes is how every drummer I meet says they love John Bonham and they love his playing, but so few of them can actually get that feel. The feel that John Bonham had. And why is that? What's missing? Why is it that they can perfect his really crazy fast triplets that he uses during his solo, but when you ask to just play when the levee breaks and actually make it sound like him? Why can't they do it? Why does it sound like this? May sound really similar to some of you, but there's a difference. And that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about today is where his feel comes from. And then I do want to just deconstruct some of his famous grooves like Fool in the Rain, Immigrant Song, stuff that I know most of you guys came here to hear. So I think one of the wisest things I ever heard said, and I wish I could remember who said it to me, was if you want to figure out somebody's playing, if you want to sound like somebody, don't listen to them, listen to what they listen to. If you want to figure out somebody's playing, you want to sound like them, don't listen to that person, listen to what they listen to. And that was kind of the road I took when trying to analyze how I would sort of disseminate what it is that made John Bonham so special. Does anybody know who some of John Bonham's favorite drummers were? Any ideas? Well, Buddy Rich. I don't know if any of you guys who have seen the video from Royal Albert Hall or any of Songs Remains the Same and how John Bonham's drum solos would usually terminate in doing something. Now it's not going to look at the same because I don't have the long hair and the headband. He would do something like this, except much faster. He would cross his arms over the other one. He didn't invent that. He got that from watching Buddy Rich. Another one of his famous drummers, Gene Krupa. Gene Krupa. And another drummer that he's fairly influenced by that you don't read about much in interviews, but it's pretty obvious, is Earl Palmer. Anybody familiar with Earl Palmer? Played on almost all of the Little Richard singles back in the day. Here's an interesting example. Okay. Everybody knows this song. Who hasn't heard that song? It's okay if you haven't. If you haven't, I'll make you a CD. I'll give it to you afterwards. This is Little Richard's tune called Keep a Knockin'. Now, I didn't spend hours in the Library of Congress perusing tons of old, obscure recordings. I didn't find that out myself. I went to a clinic, this famous drummer named Zorro, who's played with Lenny Kravitz and a bunch of other guys, and he said, here's what you guys need to know. So, does anybody think John Bonham probably listened to some Little Richard, some Earl Palmer? Probably a safe bet. That's a tribute. He didn't rip him off. That's a tribute. So, where's Earl Palmer from? Well, Earl Palmer's from New Orleans. New Orleans being, of course, we all know, the birthplace of jazz. Gene Krupa is from Chicago, but Gene Krupa grew up in Chicago when, in his teens, he went out to nightclubs and heard guys playing like Baby Dodds and Paul Barbaran. These are all drummers from New Orleans. They all moved to Chicago because when Prohibition happened, Chicago was the only place you could still drink and listen to jazz. And so all the great jazz musicians moved up there. And so lucky Gene Krupa for living in Chicago and getting to grow up listening to those guys. And so here's a famous Gene Krupa thing. Everyone knows this one. Oh, it's so quiet. Give me 1 second to figure out why my speaker's on. 1 second.